Any other comments? Any other questions?
For me, no, not now.
From anyone else? Okay. So then, I suggest that I do a short recap of last time. Okay, and by the recap, you will also understand what might be, as I said, potential questions for the exam. Okay, so we talked about at the beginning, at the introduction, in the session about the introduction to law, we talked about the difference between the law and other do's and don'ts, you know, coming from religion, from morality, from tradition. What are what are the similarities? So what do those traditions or those do's and don'ts share with laws, and what are the differences? That could be one question, for example. And what do you think? Like, all questions to all of you, of course. What do you think is if you remember from yesterday, what is the difference between the law and between the other do's and don'ts? Who wants to give an answer? Come on. There is no, you know, just share your opinion. There can't be anything wrong or whatever. Just tell me what your idea is from yesterday.
The laws you have to follow, and there another do's and don'ts, you just do it by politely or something, but you don't have to follow.
Yeah, and exactly, and super. And if you do not follow, what is the difference between the law and other do's and don'ts? If you do not follow, is there any consequence? What do you think?
If you do not follow the laws, you maybe can catch by police or charge into some criminal or something. And for the do's and don'ts, if you don't follow, you just be judged from other people.
Yeah, exactly. Super. So perfect. Yeah. So the difference is only the law can be enforced. So that's the term that you need to write down at the exam. Yeah, only the law can be enforced by sanctions. Yeah, so either you pay money, you have to pay a fee, a money punishment, or you go to jail or whatever. There are sanctions. Yeah, and the law can be enforced. While if official sanctions, I mean, you know, by the state. While if you do not follow any laws from tradition or any do's and don'ts from tradition or from religion, there are no official consequences from the state. So if I do not go to church on Sunday, there is no policeman coming to my house and, you know, forcing me to go to church. Yeah? Okay. While if I do something wrong and if I have to go to the court, and yet I do not go to the court, then the police come and take me to the court. Yeah, because it's a law and not just a do and don't coming from religion or whatever. Yeah, so that's the difference. And what is similar is that both try to govern human behavior. Yeah, so every law and also every rule of tradition serve a certain purpose. And they want to govern human behavior. So they want to, you know, direct human behavior. So that's similar, okay? And then we talked about the difference, and then we talked about the common law system and the civil law system. And do you remember what the difference between those two systems are? Any one of you? What do you think are the differences? So if you have, if there is a case in court, okay, So if there are two people having a fight or having a discussion and they go to court because they cannot agree on a solution, then on what legal source does the court, the judge, look at in a civil law system and in a common law system?
Civil law system, we will look back on the like the previous case that is similar to the case we are solving, and the common law system would be more flexible. We can decide based on the current situation.
Okay.
I think so.
Yeah, it was almost. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so in a common, but don't mix it up. Yeah, in a common law system, the judge will look at cases similar to this case, and will then the judge is bound by the decisions of other courts. Yeah, so the judge is not allowed to make its own decision if there are any other courts. So the first thing that the judge will look at are other decisions. So that's perfectly right, but that's the common law system. In a civil law system, the judge will look at the written down rules in a law code. Yeah, so in the criminal code or in the law code or whatever. Yeah? So in a civil law system, the court will look at the written down rules, while in a common law system, the court will look at other decisions, at decisions of other courts. Yeah. And the common law system is much more flexible, because if there are no other court decisions, then the judge is free to make up its own rules, his or her own rules. Yeah. Remember the video that I showed to you yesterday about this crazy judge with, who gave these strange punishments to the people. Yeah, that would not be possible in a civil law system, because in a civil law system, it's either money, or either you have to pay money or you have to go to jail. Yeah, but those just creating own rules, that would not be possible in a civil law system. In a common law system, like in the US, that is possible. Okay, and so this is much more flexible, because the court can, the judge can come up with its own rule. That's why it's called also judge-made law. And in a civil law system, it's much more foreseeable, the decision, because you just have to look basically what is written down in the laws passed by the parliament or by government, whatever. Okay. And then we talked. So those are the two important parts of the introduction. Yeah? So first, the difference between the law and other rules of tradition and religion, and then the difference between common law system and civil law system. Yeah? So that's the two parts that are relevant for the exam in terms of the first session. And then in terms of the second session, or second part of the first session that we had yesterday, or the day before, we talked about international law. And do you remember what are, if we talk about the national law, like in the session with Christopher, in the course with Christopher Hanacek that you had, talking about private law and public law, in the national legal order, the players are the human beings, so the people and the companies. So it's about contracts between a company. If you have a mobile phone, then you have a contract with the mobile phone company. Or if you buy a motorcycle, then you go to the shop dealer and you buy the motorcycle, but it's a contract between you and the shop owner, or the owner of the motorcycle. In international law, the players are not the human beings. It's about states and international organization. And it's about contracts and relations between those two players, between contracts and international organization. That's international law. Yeah? We do not focus so much on the human beings. The players are the states and the international organizations. And then we discussed what the elements are necessary to speak of a state, right? So what are the 3 elements that you need to have in order to speak of a state from an international law point of view? What are the 3 elements that you need? So that's also a potential question for the exam. What are the explain the elements that you need to speak of a state? So now, come on, what are the 3 elements? We discussed them yesterday in detail. Just give me the elements.
Territory, government, and permanent population.
Yes.
The
Super.
3 elements.
Excellent. Super. Yes. Perfect. And we talked about ways in which you could gain territory. Because one, as you perfectly said, one element is to define territory. So how could you get territory? How could a country gain territory?
We could buy it, or use force like violence to conquer the land.
Yeah. So war. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, nowadays it's not allowed anymore to just gain territory by force. So by using by starting a war. Yeah? Because there is a ban to use force in the UN Charter, in the Charter of the United Nations. But of course, still there are a lot of conflicts around the world. And what conflicts would come to your mind in which right now there is maybe not right now the danger of a war, but what heavy conflicts could you think of around the world between 2 countries? What conflicts could you think of?
Conflicts about the sea and the natural resource.
Very good, very good, super. So that's actually a very heavy reason for conflicts. And a little bit more specific, what countries are there in fight with not fight, but which countries have conflicts with each other about the resources in the sea?
Vietnam and China.
Yeah, are there conflicts, right? Right? Yes. I mean, I have somewhere. I have to look that up. I will show you that after our break. But there is. I found a video about. They're called the Spratly Islands. Have you heard of those? In the South Chinese Sea. And there China builds huge sandbanks by just, as we said yesterday, but just putting millions of tons of sand on the reefs, yeah, to claim possession, yeah. So yeah, that's for sure one conflict. What other conflicts could you think of around the world? Let's talk about geopolitics. Are there any conflicts around the world that you could think of that are right now?
No, I don't have, but I think I will look. I will try to search for some.
What about how is the relation between Vietnam and North Korea? Is there any political relationship? Or is there no relationship at all?
Oh, we have
I really ask because I really do not know. So that's why I need you, because for example, Austria has no official political relations with North Korea. Yeah? But are there? I mean, I know of course that China has relations with North Korea, but what about Vietnam? Do you know that? Or how is the relationship between Vietnam and North Korea? Does anyone know?
Our relationship seems to be okay.
Okay. because there's
The relationship has no conflicts at all.
okay.
We
Because-
supply food and some other resource for North Korea.
Okay, very interesting, because there is, you know, since there is, I mean, I think now it's a little bit better, but especially during the presidency of Donald Trump, there was a very heavy conflict, right, between North Korea and Donald Trump and the US. Yeah, so he would Donald Trump, I think, called Kim Jong-un the Rocket Man, right? And I don't know what the North Korean leader like what he said about Donald Trump, the crazy old man or stuff. So they were really having some serious conflicts, right? And another conflict right now is between Russia and the Ukraine. Yeah, I mean, between Russia and the Ukraine, there is a conflict, and actually there some people fear that right now that could really develop into a war, but because Russia is deploying a lot of troops close to the border to the Ukraine. So that's a conflict. Then of course we have the conflict between China and which other country? Oh, probably more countries, but a country that is very close to China, an island that is close to China, and that China actually perceives as being part of China. Which country is that? An island close to China that China would perceive as being Chinese territory, actually. And that country is very, very famous for building chips, you know, a chip for the computers in cars. Does anyone know? Taiwan, yeah. So between Taiwan and China, there is a big conflict. So we have a lot of conflicts around the world, yeah. But still, let's come back to our questions about the way countries could gain territory. It's by starting a war, but it's not allowed. It's not allowed. It's against the UN Charter. What other ways are there to gain territory? What other ways are there to gain territory?
Neptune growth.
Education? You meant?
Yes.
Yes, super. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So if two countries have a dispute about, for example, resources in the sea or the shoreline or whatever, then they could ask a court or a tribunal to make a decision about that. And the decision then is binding, and then that's a way how you could gain territory. I gave you an example between two countries in Europe who have an issue about the bay and the access for fishing rights right now. Exactly. What other ways? Then let's talk about in former times it was discovery, right? And in nowadays it's what about natural growth and artificial growth? What do I mean by those two? What is artificial growth and natural growth? How could you gain territory through natural growth? I told you that yesterday. Remember how could a country become larger by naturally larger in terms of a volcano, for example? You know, if a volcano is there and there's an eruption, then you know the lava, the magma comes out, goes into the sea and forms new territory. Yeah, and artificial growth is you know, as we said, yeah, if the shoreline is enlarged by just putting millions of tons of sand there, or just, you know, just building new islands at all. Okay, and then we talked about the second element was population, the permanent population, and we said, well, the link between the population and the state is the concept of, yeah. So what two ways are there in which you could gain nationality of a country? There are two concepts, right? What are those two concepts? So how could you get the Vietnamese citizenship? How did you get the Vietnamese citizenship? Or why did you get the Vietnamese citizenship?
Our parents is Vietnamese, so we are Vietnamese.
Yes, very good, super. Because the citizenship follows the citizenship of your parents. Yes, super. So that's the first approach, yeah? That's, for example, the case in Vietnam, that's the case in Austria. And the other concept is you get the citizenship of the country in which you are
Born in.
Yes, you are born, super. Yes, and which country is the perfect example for that concept?
USA.
It's the USA. Yes, so if you are born on US territory, you are entitled to get the citizenship. Yeah. Okay. Exactly. Super. And if you are a national of a country, especially if you do business, that's an advantage. Why? Because then you might get what? If you have any issues somewhere around the world, you could get, how is that called, the term? You could get help, right? And from help from your Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And how is that called in legal terms? You could get diplomatic protection. Yeah, so that's what it's called. So remember that. Yeah, so one advantage that you have as a Vietnamese national, a Vietnamese company, you would get diplomatic protection from your foreign ministry, from your Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Yeah. So that's a very positive thing. Don't underestimate that. Yeah. So that happens all the time around the world. Yeah. If you run a company and you have issues somewhere else, then you will ask, you know, that was, for example, a famous case of an Austrian company that had issues in Iran, and another company that had issues in Italy, for example. And then they would try to you know, get help through your own Ministry of Foreign Affairs, yeah, or through the embassy then in that country. Yeah? But you're only eligible to get that help if you are a national. Okay, good. And then we talked about the last element. That's the government. Yeah. So what do I mean by government? It's about basically the law making and the law effectuation element. Yeah? Okay, so you need a certain structure in the country that runs the country. Yeah, a kind of an organizational structure of the country. Someone that makes the laws, someone that effectuates, so that, you know, looks whether the laws are also followed. So you need to have a structure, so that such that you can speak of a government, and the government enjoys immunity. Yeah. So you cannot sue the government or a state in another court. Yeah. Yeah. And also, you cannot sue any members of a government. So it would not be possible that that someone in Austria sues a member of the Vietnamese government in an Austrian court, because the members of the government enjoy immunity. Yeah. Okay. And then we talked about the second player in international law, and that's the international organizations. Yeah. And what is the example for the international organization? What is an example for the international organization? What is the biggest international organization? What is the biggest international organization? I'm sure you've heard of it. It's the United Nations.
United Nations.
The United Nations. Yeah.
I think I heard it before. Might be. My memory is still.
Okay, so the United Nations, that's the biggest international organization. Yeah. And there are some elements, yeah, for an international organizations, yeah, such that you can speak of an international organizations. And we talked about those elements, and that's a slide. I can open that slide. That's also important for the exam. Yeah. So here, yeah, talked about international organizations, yeah, and the elements that you see. It needs to be established by states permanently, so not just for a short period of time, permanently, through an international agreement for a special purpose and with own organs. So those are the 5 elements that need to be present in order to speak of an international organization. Okay. And one example, and the most famous example probably, is the United Nations here. Okay. So typical questions for this part is, tell me what are the elements of a state, and you would write down permanent population, government, and defined territory. Yeah. And if I say explain those elements, then you tell me, you tell me a little bit, you explain those elements like we have done it yesterday and like I did it right now. Yeah. Another question could be, what is the difference, what 2 concepts are there to gain territory? Then you tell me either it's one concept is that the nationality follows the nationality of your parents. That's called jus sanguinis. And the other concept is that you have the citizenship of the country on whose territory you are born. That's the concept of jus soli. Yeah. So those are the two concepts. Then a question could be, what are the elements of an international organization? And then you write me those 5 elements here. Okay. So you see, it's really not that difficult. Yeah. There will be no surprise at the exam, but still you have to study those. Yeah. Because otherwise, it will be hard. I told you that there are some very often international conflicts arise out, as you already said, or someone of you said perfectly, that it's about questions of the resources in the sea, about oil and gas. So there are a lot of questions, and there are own rules about who belongs to, which part of the sea does still belong to the country, and which is international waters. So there are lots of rules about that. It's actually quite complex, but I do not ask those for the exam. So just that you know, there are a lot of questions. Also, questions about outer space. Yeah, just think of, you know, maybe you have heard that, especially in the US right now, the United States, there are a couple of big companies organizing flights in the outer space. So you know, for example, Elon Musk from Tesla. Have you heard of Tesla, the company? Tesla is building those, you know, famous cars that run with batteries. Yeah? So not with gas or so not with, you know, petrol, but with batteries. And that company also organizes flights in the outer space. And there is another company, Virgin, how's it called? Virgin Airways, I think. And also this company organizes flights in the outer space. That's of course very expensive. But for some, you know, there are millionaires out there or billionaires out there who are willing to pay a lot of money to go into outer space. Yeah. And so that's someone probably in 20, 30, 40 years, it will be much more common than people travel to the outer space. Yeah. So naturally, there will be some legal questions about, you know, what happens if, you know, there are a lot of people for example, going to the moon. Is there can you gain property at the moon? Who does the moon belong to? Or who does, you know, what happens if there are any accidents in outer space between an aircraft and a satellite? So whatever, there are, you know, that's an own space. The outer space is an own area in which there will be a lot of difficult legal questions in the futures. In the future. Okay, so then I would like to continue with the new stuff. Do you have any questions so far?
So far, no.
Great. Anyone else?
I can understand the meanings of the lessons.
And I really try, as I said, to really highlight those things that are important. Yeah, I do not want to, you know, stress you with things that are too detailed or, you know.
Yeah, too detailed. It's not necessary. It makes my memories worse. I cannot remember. I only need to remember most important parts.
Great, and that's why I tell you, all of you, I tell those parts that are especially relevant. Okay, so let's now move on, and I will share my presentation. So we stopped yesterday here at the slide about the international organizations. Let's move on now with the sources of law. Yeah, and for that I will show you a video up front, but for that I have to do it this way. So I hope that works now. Let's see.
Sources of international law. Visualized. What are the sources of international law? The term source of law refer to legal rules governing the international community. Unlike national laws, where sources of law are specified in the Constitution, which is superior to laws and regulations, no such hierarchy exists in international law. The International Court of Justice stipulated a catalogue of sources of international law, which is used when deciding legal disputes states submitted before the World Court. The first source is international treaty, whether a general or particular convention, a bilateral, regional or multinational one. A treaty is a binding international agreement by which the states parties agree in writing to observe their contractual obligations. The second source is customary law, as evidence of a general state's practice accepted as law. At the outset, international law was mainly regulated by customs, which is an unwritten rule and consists of two parts: state's practice and opinio juris. State practice is the material part of customary law, and it combines states' behavior and actions. In other words, it means what states do and say. Opinio juris is the second part of customary law, and it means that the state's verbal or material acts have to be accepted as a binding law by the rest of the international community. For instance, the world accepts and believes that it's legal for a state to act in a self-defense. In addition to treaties and customs, other sources of law exist, like the judicial decisions of international courts, juristic writings, which represent the teachings of the most highly qualified publicists, and lastly, the general principles of law recognized by civilized nations. While these are not formal sources, they can still play an important role as evidence of international law.
So, sources of law, yeah. In a national legal order, so in the Vietnamese legal order or in the Austrian legal order, our number one legal source is either written down rules passed by government or passed by parliament, whatever. Okay. So that's our number one sources, yeah? The national laws. In international law, of course, it's not the national laws that are sources of law, because now in international law, it's all about the relations between the states and between the international organizations. So there is no superior institution that makes law in international law. It's just, it's the law. It's the rules between the states and international organizations. And the only help that we have in international law is Article 38 of the Statute of the International Court of Justice. Yeah? Article 38. And in this Article 38, it's written down what legal sources the International Court of Justice uses in solving disputes. Yeah, so if two countries have a problem, they bring the case before the International Court of Justice, and then the International Court of Justice has to decide. And how does it decide? It needs to look at the law, right? And which sources of law does the International Court use? It first looks, the judges look whether there is an international treaty, a contract between two countries. Yeah? Remember, it's all about countries and international organizations. So, is there a treaty? If not, the contract, the court is a custom. Yeah. If there's not a custom, then maybe there are general principles of law recognized by civilized nations. And lastly, the court could also look at other decisions, judicial decisions, so other court decisions or decisions of tribunals, and the teachings, so the writings of the most highly qualified publicists in international law. Those are the professors of international law. So the court could also use, if, for example, a famous professor in international law wrote a book about a certain topic, and there's a question about the topic, the International Court of Justice could base its decision on these writings of that professor. Yeah. And now let's talk about those 4 bullet points in a little bit more detail. Yeah. So what are international treaties? Those are written agreements between states and international organizations, or between international organizations. Yeah. For example, the Charter of the United Nations. So when all the countries around the world agreed on forming the United Nations, then they signed the Charter. So that's a contract, that's an agreement between the states. And in international law, such written agreements between states are called international treaty. So I'm sure, of course, Vietnam has a lot of international treaties with other countries around the world. Yeah? So, for example, with your neighboring countries, yeah, or whatever. There's a lot of international treaties between countries. Yeah. And if we talk about international treaties, one international treaty is very important, yeah? And that's the, like you see here, the 1969 Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. It was signed in 1969 in Vienna. That's why it's called Vienna Convention. Convention is just if a treaty is not just signed by 2 countries, but by more countries, then you call it a convention. Yeah. So the Convention on the Law of Treaties, and it's very important because whenever there are any problems with international treaties, then the Vienna Convention tells you how these treaties are to be interpreted, terminated, whatever. Yeah? So the Vienna Convention tells the community, the world community, the basic principles of treaty law. It tells us about the procedures for how treaties become binding and enter into force. The Vienna Convention also says or tells us what happens if a country breaches a treaty. So the consequences of a breach. It tells us how treaties can be terminated, and it gives us clues. It gives us the answer to how treaties are interpreted. So that's why it's so important. So whenever there are any problems or any questions with international treaties between 2 countries, whenever there are questions or disputes or doubts about that treaty, the countries look at this convention, the Vienna Convention, and then they solve. This Vienna Convention gives them the answer about, for example, if there is a treaty between Vietnam and North Korea, such an international treaty, and it's not, the treaty itself does not say exactly how the treaty can be terminated, so ended, then you could look at the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, and that tells you then how an international treaty can be terminated. Or if the treaty, Vietnam has an international treaty with Austria, and and in this case, let's say Austria violates or breaches a rule in that treaty, then you could look at the Vienna Convention if you want to know what the consequences of a breach of a treaty are. So that's why this Vienna Convention is very important, and please, you should remember that also for the exam. Okay. That's unfortunately that's only in German, but I will tell you what it means. That's Wiener Übereinkommen. That just means the Vienna Convention about the law. Yeah? And now you see all the countries that are in green or in Turkish Turkish-wise, they are all members of this convention. Yeah. So all of these are members of the convention. Yeah. And they have ratified or signed at least. Yeah. So all these green and Turkish-wise countries. So you see almost all the countries around the world. Yeah. Then the second, so remember, we talked now, we have these four sources of law. Yeah. So we talked now about the international treaties. Let's now talk about the custom. Custom is an evidence of a general practice. So that's a general practice done, or a general practice performed by the countries around the world, and it needs to be accepted as law. Yeah? So you see here a constant, so permanent, and uniform, so similar usage or practice among the states over a period of time, and that's accepted as law. So for example, giving foreign diplomats criminal immunity, that's a custom. So around the world, all the foreign diplomats are giving criminal immunity. So you cannot, for example, the ambassador of Vietnam in Austria cannot be put before a criminal court in Austria, because the ambassador enjoys, or the diplomat enjoys, criminal immunity. And that's the same around the world. But that's not written down somewhere. There's no treaty about that. That's just a custom. Yeah? So that's everywhere in the world, or almost everywhere in the world, it's used the same way. So that's a constant and virtually uniform usage among states, and it's also accepted as law. Yeah? Okay. Or you see, I gave you another example: protecting non-combatants as civilians. Protecting non-combatants as civilians and sick or wounded soldiers during international armed conflicts. Yeah. So they are to be protected. Those are also customary rules. Yeah? There is no written down law on that, yeah? Or written down treaty or whatever. Yeah? So that's a custom. Yeah. Okay. Remember, we have now talked about the second element, and the third element are the general principles of law recognized by civilized nations. So now here, the general principles. What are those principles? Those principles are so general, and they're so common knowledge that they basically are applied in all major legal systems around the world. Yeah. And those are used by the International Court of Justice if there is no treaty, so no clear custom, then courts will look whether there is a general principle of law. Yeah. Okay. One example is res judicata. That means that you are not allowed to be put in a court if this case has already been decided. Yeah, but that's a little bit too complicated. So I will not ask the res judicata at the exam. So just know that there are general principles of law recognized by civilized nations. Those are the general principles that apply in all major legal systems. And the last source of law are the judicial decisions and the teachings of the most highly qualified publicists in international law. Here, the judicial decisions and the teachings, those are the decisions of the International Court of Justice itself or other tribunals. So, for example, you know, if there is if two countries have a dispute about the coastline and they do not want to go to the International Court of Justice, they could also go to another tribunal if they agree to. Yeah, and also those the decisions of those tribunals could be part or could be used as a source of law. And the writings of, as I told you, the writings of the most highly qualified international law professors around the world. Yeah? So those could also serve as a source of law. Okay, so those are the four principles. Those are the four sources of law. So now, please pay attention. Yeah, that's a very likely question for the exam. Yeah, the question of the exam could be: explain the sources of international law. Yeah? Explain the sources of international law, and then you would write down, well, you find the sources of international law in Article 38 of the Statute of the International Court of Justice. And those four are the International Treaty, Custom, General Principles, and the judicial decisions and the teachings of the most highly qualified publicists. Okay? And if I say, explain to me the sources of international law, then you explain those four. Okay? Very important.
Yes, explain the four detailed.
Yeah. Then you would tell me basically what, you know, then you would tell me that an international treaty are written agreements between states and international organizations and international organizations. Yeah. And then you would tell me that a custom is an evidence of a general practice accepted as law through a custom. Yeah, you know, you would tell me that. And the general principles, you would explain that those are so general that they apply in all major legal systems, and they're used if there is no treaty or no clear custom. Yeah, and you would tell me the judicial decisions of that it means the decisions of the Court of Justice and other tribunals, and the writings of the international law scholars. So there is no surprise for the exam. You just have to study the presentations that we go through together. No surprises at the exam. And just one term that's also important in international law, that's called jus cogens. Yeah, jus cogens here. You know, at the end. And those rules, they are so fundamental that no derogation from them is permitted. So that means, give an example, then it's clear, the prohibition on genocide and slavery. Yeah, so that's a jus cogens. There is no possibility that two states agree in an international treaty. They agree on, you know, slavery or whatever. Yeah, so the ban, the prohibition on slavery is so fundamental that it's not allowed that any countries make rules about it and allow slavery in an international treaty. Yeah. Okay, that's the term. That means jus cogens. Yeah. Okay, and then the last slide before the break. We've now talked so much about the International Court of Justice. Now I would like to give you some to explain a little bit to you about explain to you the International Court of Justice. It's the chief judicial organ of the United Nations, and it's the most important court in international law. Yeah. So it's one of the organs of the United Nations, and we will have an own session. I will have an own session with you about the about the United Nations. Yeah. It's the chief judicial organ of the United Nations. Its official language is English and French. Why do you think French is French an official language in the International Court of Justice? English is okay. English is quite clear because English is such an important language around the world that, you know, that's understandable, right? But why French? Because French used to be the language of the diplomats in history. Yeah, if you look back, centuries back, it's been French that has been the language of the diplomats around the world. So that's why it's still French. And though French nowadays is not that important anymore. Yeah? All UN members are parties to the statute. Okay. The seat of the court. So where is the court? So that's a picture of the International Court of Justice. It's at the Peace Palace in The Hague, in the Netherlands. Yeah, it's in Europe. Yeah, it's in the Netherlands. Yeah, and that's the building. There are 15 judges who form the International Court of Justice. So it consists of 15 judges. And they're elected for 9 years, yeah, by the United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council. And remember, it's the forum for disputes between states. So whenever there are states having, whenever states have disputes with each other, they can go to the International Court of Justice. Okay, but not for international organizations, just for states. And the decisions by the International Court of Justice is final and binding. There is no other court, there's no higher court that you could go to if you're not happy with the decision of the International Court of Justice. That's the one and only court in international law. And it's binding. It's final and binding, the decision. Yeah, the UN Security Council can also ask or request advisory opinions, but we will talk about that later on. Yeah. So remember, the court is situated in the Peace Palace in The Hague in the Netherlands. Official languages are English and French. It's the highest organ of the chief judicial organ of the United Nations. 15 judges for 9 years. So the International Court of Justice consists of 15 judges elected for 9 years, and it's responsible, competent for deciding disputes between states, and the decision is final and binding between the parties. Yeah? And I would like to show you one such a case between two countries. In this case, it's between Somalia and Kenya.
Leiner für alle präsentiert beim WSV Angebote zum Jubeln.
Aktion verlängert, nur noch wie. Good afternoon. It's a Friday, the 29th of August, 2014. Welcome to this Friday edition of News Desk here on KTN. My name is Joy Doreen Bira, and we'll take a look at the news. Let's begin in Somalia, where Somalia has taken its maritime border dispute with Kenya to the International United Nations top court, that is the International Court of Justice, that is based in The Hague. And according to reports, the case filed yesterday is expected to heavily influence the fate of potentially lucrative oil and gas reserves off the Kenyan coast. KTN's Noor Tieno reports.
A dispute that has been simmering for years between Kenya and Somalia is now before the judges at the International Court of Justice, a court whose jurisdiction both Kenya and Somalia have accepted. This is the center of the conflict between the neighbors. Somalia insists that Kenya has stubbornly encroached into her international waters by misinterpreting the direction of the borderline along the Indian Ocean coast. Kenya allegedly sees the borderline extending in a straight line into the ocean, giving Kenya about 100,000 square kilometers of very lucrative territory. Somalia says Kenya is claiming more than her fair share, insisting instead that the borderline should extend southeastwards, giving almost the same size of territory back to Somalia. This battle is not just about the water or the land. Already, Kenya, Somalia, and international investors are convinced that the area is potentially rich in oil and gas deposits. Even though some big investors have been reluctant to get into the exploration for the resources due to lack of clarity on which country legally owns the territory, some brave ones have allegedly already been given exploration contracts by the Kenyan government. This is at the center of the court case at the ICJ.
In the near future.
In a statement released by the court last evening, Somalia is requesting the court to determine, on the basis of international law, the complete course of the Indian Ocean borderline between Kenya and Somalia. Somalia says all diplomatic negotiations have failed to resolve the disagreement. Although cases at the ICJ can take years to conclude, the court, which is the United Nations highest court, is highly respected and its decision would be firmly binding. Now, Tino Katian, News Desk.
So you see now, so that was one example of a case that was brought by the states, by two states who have a conflict with each other, a case brought to the International Court of Justice. Yeah, and now you will see. You will also, knowing now so much about international law, you will probably also read and listen to the news in the television or on internet in a different way, right? Because now you know International Court of Justice, whenever there are disputes, you know what International Court of Justice is. Yeah. So are there any questions right now? So that was the final part of the introduction to international law. Are there any questions to that?
No.
Okay. So then let's have a break. Okay, and then we start with the European law. Let's do half an hour. Okay. Let's continue at, what is it, 3:50 your time, 3:50 p.m. Okay. Great. Enjoy your break. Get a coffee, and we will see each other soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Welcome back from the break. Hope you're fine. Hope all of you are again in front of your screens. Great, super. So now I would like to talk about the European Union. Yeah. Again, just very briefly, and only the most important points that I want to discuss with you. Is any one of you, or has any one of you already been to Austria? I think there is an exchange. There's the possibility for 1 or 2 students to study at the FH Krems, at the University of Krems, right? For 1 or 2 semesters. Is that right? Has any one of you been to Austria?
No, I joined the exchange program, but I still not be able to go there
because of the Corona situation.
No, I got failed the interview.
Okay.
I go into the interview and still not get assigned it.
Okay, so if any one of you has the opportunity, really take that opportunity, because I think it would be really a great experience for you to come to Austria. You know, there was one time there was a class here that was, you know, pre-Corona, but so before Corona started, the pandemic situation started. There was a class here, and I visited them. And that was really a very nice meeting, you know, when all this, there were actually lots of students already coming here, so that was actually very, very nice. So whenever you have the opportunity, come to Austria, come to Europe, enjoy the experience. Will be for sure fun, and if you hold a double degree, so also from Austria, from Krems, then of course you should know about at least about the basics of how the European Union works, because that's there are very strong ties in the European Union. So it's not yet a state, but it very much, a state as a European Union, a state, but it's very, very much more than just an international organization. Yeah, so that's we're on the way, I would say, to really become one state. Yeah? Probably it would take some decades until you can really speak of a state, but still. So the European Union, very, very important. The biggest part of our laws in Austria already coming from Europe, so our European laws. So that's why it's so important for you. And you will also see how I think it's also interesting to see how such a political building like the European Union could work. If you have, just imagine, I mean, there are lots of different countries in the European Union with different languages, so everything very, very difficult. Yeah? But still, taking that into consideration, it's quite an outstanding institution. So, a question to you: what comes to your mind if you think of the European Union? Just because I'm curious, so there is no right or wrong. Just tell me what do you think of if you hear Europe and the European Union?
France.
Okay. What else?
Ukraine. And Austria.
Okay, super. Do you know any famous European singers? Or do you know any European sports star?
Not really.
Is any one of you a fan of tennis?
Never heard of it.
Okay, now tennis, I mean the sport tennis. Yeah? So the biggest, a lot of people would argue that the best player that has ever lived in tennis is Roger Federer. He's a Swiss tennis player. Have you heard of Roger Federer?
Yes, we are.
Yes, super.
Yes, of
so
course.
he's European. He's from Swiss, so he's Swiss from Switzerland. Switzerland is interestingly, it's not a member of the European Union, but it's right in the center of Europe. Yeah? So Roger Federer is a very famous sportsman. The right now #1 of the tennis ranking is Novak Djokovic. He's from Serbia, also very famous, even though Serbia is also not a part of the European Union. Yeah? Then of course we have lots of great soccer players. Yeah. Just think of Cristiano Ronaldo. Have you heard of Cristiano Ronaldo?
Yes.
Yeah. So he's from. Do you know which country he comes from?
Portugal.
Yes, very good. Portugal. Yes, Portugal is member of the European Union. Yeah. What is, by the way, what is your favorite sport? What do the young people in Vietnam play?
Soccer.
We play soccer and basketball.
Basketball also. Okay. Soccer, basketball. Great. Okay. We have right now in Austria, we have the first ever basketball player that made it to the NBA. To the NBA. So that was we're very proud of that. Our first player. Okay, basketball, soccer. Okay. And is that true for men and women the same, or is that more that the men do play soccer and basketball, and the women or girls play other sports, or how is there a difference?
We do have both girls soccer teams and boys soccer teams, so then no difference between sports.
So also lots of women play soccer.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So also in Austria, the #1 sport is for sure soccer. Yeah. Soccer. And does any one of you have a favorite soccer team from Europe, or any soccer team that you know? Apart, of course, from the national teams. I mean, from club soccer, club football. Anyone? Because I heard some of the European teams are famous in Asia as well, right? Is that true?
Yes.
And
in Vietnam, in Vietnam, we have a lot of fans of Manchester United.
Okay, interesting. Manchester United. Talking about Cristiano Ronaldo, right? Because he plays right now again for Manchester United. And is that true that a lot of people also like Manchester City in Asia? Can you tell me? Is that, have you heard of Manchester City? That's the second club in Manchester.
Yes.
Great.
I know Real Madrid and I think David Alaba now playing for Real Madrid, right?
Yes,
very famous Austrian football player.
Very, very good. I'm almost emotional right now, yeah, because you know that. Very, very good. Yes, David Alaba is probably one of the best soccer players that Austria ever had, and he played I think 15 years for Bayern Munich, which is also a very famous football club in Europe. So Bayern Munich. And he played for Bayern Munich, and now he plays for Real Madrid, and I think he does very well there. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Real Madrid. Then another famous one is FC Barcelona. But right now they play not very well. And then of course there are some others, so lots of other players. But soccer is for sure the most famous sport in Austria, at least for men. For women, I think different. So lots of women play at the school. At school level, they play volleyball and basketball, and tennis is also very, very popular. Skiing, of course, you know, Austria is we have a lot of slopes and skiing areas, so skiing is a big thing here in Austria. Yeah, I think that's our favorite sports. Yeah. Okay. Then I suggest we start. I will show you the. Does anyone of you know how many member states European Union has? I mean, have you already heard that? Maybe. If not, no worries. I'm sure that most of the Austrians or most of the Europeans, if you ask them at the street how many member states the European Union has, no one, most of them would not know it. Yeah?
27, I think.
27. So, okay. That's the map of the European Union, yeah? You have all those countries in color that are colored. Those are members of the European Union. And you see one famous country has left the European Union 1 year ago. Which was that? Which country?
The UK.
Excellent. Super. The United Kingdom left. As you can see here, that's the UK, and that left the European Union. Yeah. Wait, I just have to. So, just a second, I'm with you. Okay, so that's the UK, and that has left, right? And you see now, and that's a problem, right? For the because you see, it's not just UK. It's not just. Can you see my cursor when I move the mouse pad? You see my cursor?
Yes.
Yes, super. Okay, so you see that the UK is not just this part. The UK is also that part. So that's the northern part of Ireland. Yeah. And now we have a problem because on that island here in Ireland, yeah, here we have now all of a sudden a new border with a member of the European Union and no member of the European Union. So that was one of the biggest problems for the UK leaving Europe, because right now we have all of a sudden here a member, because you will see once someone someone crossed the border to one of the countries of the European Union, he or she is basically allowed to travel around the entire European Union. So the border between a member and a non-member, that's very important, because there are lots of controls. There is a normal control border. There's a normal, control at the border. But once you're in the European Union, you can basically, there are no barriers anymore. Yeah, so you can freely move and freely, transfer goods, etc. So that's why it's so important. That's why that raises a lot of issues. Yeah, if you have all of a sudden such a border within one island. Yeah, so that was basically one of the biggest problems. And you see, so that the biggest players in Europe are probably Germany and France. Politically speaking, from the point of view of the economy, Germany is by far the most important economy in the entire European Union. Yeah? So Germany is Germany is a very, very strong player in the UK, in the European Union. But of course, there are other big countries like Italy, Spain, Sweden. You just see Sweden and Finland, they do not have so many inhabitants. They're like 10 million, around 8 to 10 million, but still they're, for European Union standards, they're big countries, right, in terms of territory. Italy has a lot of inhabitants. We have here Greece. You see, there's the border, also very, in part, very problematic is the border between Greece and Turkey, and between Bulgaria and Turkey. There is a lot of, during the refugee crisis, there were coming lots of refugees from here, from the area Middle East, Syria. They would travel here around, through Turkey, and then they would try to go from the Turkish border to one of the islands of Greece. You see, just imagine how many islands here are. Those are all Greece territory. Yeah. So once the refugees made it to one of the islands, of the Greek islands, they would be allowed to ask for asylum in the European Union. So that was a very problematic, or is a very problematic border. And then also in terms of refugees, there are lots of refugees coming here from North Africa, you see, and then they would try to go to either Italy. Yeah, you see here, here are the two islands of Italy. Yeah. Also Spain, you see. So you see here. So there are lots of ways refugees could come to the European Union. Yeah. So, however, you see, those are the countries, and there is a big difference. Yeah. So there is a big difference in terms of language, in terms of culture between Italy and Sweden, because between Portugal and Romania, between Greece and the Netherlands. Yeah. So huge differences, and that makes it so complicated. Yeah. All in all, European Union has around 450 million people. We have 27 member states. 19 member states use the euro as official currency. And just imagine that we have 24 official languages. 24 official languages. So that's really a big problem, because all the laws that are passed on the European Union level need to be translated into 24 official languages. And all of those 24 official languages have the same rank, so they are all perceived authentic. They all have the same rank. So it's not that the English version is the one that rules and the others are just, they are not so important. No, they're all at the same level. They're all as important as any other one. There's not one that decides. It's all are on the same rank. Just imagine that. Very difficult. We have here the major part of the people in the European Union are still Christians. A big part is also does not follow any religion, and we have a growing Muslim community, very strong growing Muslim community. Are there some Muslims in? Is there a Muslim community in Vietnam as well? Anyone? Are there lots of Muslims in Vietnam?
No.
I guess.
Right.
Okay. So not so much, right? How many inhabitants are there in Vietnam roughly? How many millions?
Almost 100.
100 millions. Wow, that's really big. Just imagine. I mean, just imagine. The European Union has 450, but we are 27 countries, and 27 countries are only 400 million, and one country 100 million. So you are a very important player actually. Austria has only 8 million, so tiny, tiny. Okay, I would like to. Do you know the anthem of the European Union? Have you heard that already? Maybe in if any one of you has maybe already watched the soccer game, maybe you came across the European anthem. Shall I play it to you?
Yeah, sure.